Cool.
Okay, let's kick this off.
Yo.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another session of the Playhouse. Yani, this one, I say this every episode that it's about to go down, but this one is too serious. I've known this guy from about 2001, and this guy has done some amazing things in this industry. You're going to hear stories that have never been heard before. This is the true OG of the industry. I recorded my first song ever in this studio, man. So excited to have none other than a pillar in this Kenyan music industry. He's dabbled in the gospel. He's also played around with the secular industry. He's been in videos in terms of video production. He's done so much, Yani. He's been in TV. Hey, I'm talking too much. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, put your hands together for none other than Stevo, Steve Ominde. Stevo, welcome to the Playhouse, man.
I'm happy to be here, man.
Yani, thank you for the opportunity to just hear knowledge, hear wisdom, hear about the journey. You know, you're a real OG, eh?
Well, I would believe so.
There are guys here who are wondering, who is this guy? But they'll know. Anyway, Stevo, I always start the Playhouse by throwing this thing way back, talking about the beginning. I'm trying to lay a foundation onto who you are. So let's take this thing. When did you fall in love with music?
Well, music, goodness, I think it's always been a part of me. Like if you meet guys I was with in Primo, in high school, I don't think anybody is surprised that I'm doing what I do now, especially guys I grew up with, because even in the estate, I was never good in soccer. I was never good in sports. I was those guys who used to walk around and exchange tapes with the older guys who had tapes back then. So it was always a thing that was somewhere there in the background. If there's one thing I was always very comfortable with, every time I watched music videos, every time I listened to music on the radio, I always felt like it was somewhere I belonged. When I watched back when I was, before even I was a teenager, when the whole advent of music videos had just begun, and it was rare to get music videos, you'd watch them like once a week on television or something. I always felt comfortable watching and trying to understand what that industry was about, even though at that time, every single video came from America. There had no videos in Kenya, but it was just something that I just always felt like there was something drawing me to it. Now, if we look at my family, my dad is a musician.
Oh, your dad is a musician?
Yeah, my dad was a choir master for over 20 years. St. Barnabas Church in Langata. And so there are times when after school, instead of going home, we'd be taken for choir practice. So you sit there from 5:30 to 8 waiting for them to finish doing their rehearsals, then is when you go home. So all through, I mean, even if you go to my shags, it's not uncommon to find musicians. It's just a thing which, it's been there for a long time. We have people from my village who did recordings with Polygram in Nairobi in the 50s, 60s. And the recordings are there on vinyl, 45 and 22.5 vinyls. They actually exist. And so it's not anything that anybody finds out of the ordinary. If you look back, way back into, where it all began from. And I'm those guys who, I had a huge interest in just understanding the art and the science of how to produce a song, right from an early age. So I remember when we were kids, I couldn't afford to buy tapes, so I'd take my dad's tapes and record over them. Like I'd look for the ones that looked like he's not interested in using anymore. Yeah. I'd hide them for a week. I see whether he's going to ask for them. If he doesn't ask for them, then I know he doesn't need them. So back then, the only thing you could record was radio. So we had a little single deck.
But by back then, what year are we talking about? Let's give context in terms of time. This
is late 80s.
Late 80s.
And this was when, Michael Jackson, Madonna, and the likes were what was playing on radio throughout. So obviously, back then there was what we call like a real record industry, People were selling tens of millions of records abroad. And I remember when Michael Jackson Bad album, the day it was dropped in US, it was on our news. It was on Habari. KBC, Habari. That's how big the record industry was back then. And I remember somewhere in the middle of the news, a Swahili presenter showing clips of Michael Jackson Bad music video on the normal news like what we watch today. And that's just the scale of what the record industry was back then. So definitely, I had this huge pull towards it. Because my dad was a choir master, he had a keyboard. It was a Yamaha, and it was really nothing to write home about. But there was something in that keyboard that I wanted to always go back and try and play with. Yeah, it was today the kind of keyboard that I don't think anybody would ever be interested in buying, because even the simplest free software app that you can download to your phone for free that is a keyboard is better than what it was at that time. But it was interesting because it had a function where you could play drums, and then when you stop playing, it plays them back. Now, that was the beginning of everything, because the idea that every other electronic keyboard you'd play and it couldn't store anything. Yeah. So this was one that we discovered something with my elder bro. Whenever the keyboard remained at home and my dad was not very keen on figuring out who has touched it, we'd go play with it. Now, it had a function that you could play things, and the same things you play, when you hit a record and a playback button that was somewhere on the surface, it would play back the things that you recorded. Now, that became the foundation and the basis for my interest in wanting to know how to produce music. So this was very way back, and all this was very elementary. It was a keyboard that had only 8 sounds. That's it. It was a piano, a xylophone, a guitar, a bass, and I don't know what else, and then one drum kit with like about 8 different things you could knock, and that was it. Yeah. So in spite of that, what I'd do is I'd play around with it and I'd compare with stuff I would hear on radio. So I'd play around with this and then I'd compare with Michael Jackson or Madonna or all the people who were hot at that time. And then the question kept looming in my head: why is it different? Why is what they're doing sounding different from what I'm doing? Yeah. And I couldn't figure out why. I didn't understand that there was a certain complexity in their recording process, in their production process that we were not exposed to at that time. Yeah. So the question is what kept ringing in my head all the way until the time when I became a music producer. So based on this, this was basically the foundation. Because I was in church a lot, my dad taught a choir, I became friends with the askari for the church. So what would happen is, because the church was near home, there are days I'd take a walk to the church, and so we talk the guy and ask the guy to open for me the door for entering the church, like on a weekday or something, or in the evenings, yeah, when nothing was going on in the church. So after some time, I even remember he was called Kyoko. He was a very dope guy. And so he kind of saw something I was trying to do. So he'd open for me, then lock, because he didn't want guys to know that he's kind of breached the rules for the church and everything. So I'd go in, I had no idea how to play anything, but it was just fun banging on a upright acoustic piano in the church, which was what was there at that time. It was just fun. It just sounded good. I didn't know what I was trying to do. I didn't know where I was trying to go with all this, but I could feel there was just something drawing me to this particular craft. Yeah. And
how old are you at this time?
At this time, I am 12, about 12, 13. Like, I have not yet finished Primo. So by this time...
By the way, where did you go to Primo?
I went to Primo in St. Mary's in Westlands, St. Mary's School in Raptor Road. And also in school, there was a huge music culture, I'd say. We had an orchestra. We had musicals every year. I didn't really get to participate in any of these because most of these were being done by guys in high school and guys who were in A-level and whatnot. And we had a course that was called IB. And so it was mainly those guys. I mean, by this time I was standard 6 or something of the sort. But even in school, there was a strong music culture. Kids had tapes. They'd come to school and we'd exchange. Somebody would have LL Cool J and you would have something from around that period of time.
Boys to Men.
No. Boys to Men comes much later.
Oh, hey, okay, my bad.
This is pre Boys to Men. This is the time for who was hot at that time. It was there was rap. Rap had just begun. There was people like it was dance music. It was house music. So there was Kina Robin S, Kina Technotronic, Pump Up the Jam, you know those songs.
Pump Up the Jam.
Yeah, by this time, I mean, the whole idea of producing music really wasn't. It hadn't started to make sense. At this time, the fad and the culture and what was driving us was to collect music. So we became collectors. Yeah, in the estate, the guy with the most music was the popular guy. You see. So it was a competition for who has the latest music, who has listened to this, where can I get this album or this song or whatever from. Yeah. So that was the culture that time. We were really not interested by then, or we didn't have a way to drive us in the direction of how we can start making music, but we knew we wanted to have it. So it was a question of collecting tape after tape after tape after tape. By that time, there was the culture of buying blank cassettes.
Yes.
You'd go to town, buy a blank TDK. TDK was the hottest model
Stevo.
at that time. Yeah.
You're old, homie.
So you'd buy a blank tape and look for a guy who has music, take a blank tape and record that tape to yours. Yeah. And that's how we began to collect and listen and analyze music. Yeah. So this was primo days going into high school. Now come high school, for a long time I wanted to be a singer. That's the funny thing that most people don't even know. My first desire in the music business was even to be a producer. I wanted to be a singer. So I used to write songs, I used to scribble on exercise books and all that stuff. I'd analyze lyrics from songs. And I actually wanted to sing. Yeah, I wanted to be a singer. Yeah, and for a long time I thought that's what I was going to become. Yeah, until sometime when I was around Form 3, I listened to an album by a group called Jodeci. Yeah.
What later on became Casey and Jojo.
Yes. And Jodeci had an album called Forever My Lady. And that is the one album that completely changed the direction of everything. Yeah. Because by this time, CDs were very rare. A CD was a very rare commodity at this time. CDs were only originals. There was no CDs you could ban.
There's no emotion.
Yes.
There's no emotion.
So you had to buy a CD. And those days, there were like 3 companies that could press CDs. I think Sony, Polygram, Columbia, something like that. So they had to come from US. And they're all silver with black writing of the songs and the producers and everything on the disc itself. So you would find like a music enthusiast has 4 CDs. And those 4 CDs came from England or US and they were shipped by a friend or something. Yeah, that's how rare CDs were at that time. So for a long time we were used to listening to tapes because the matatus were playing tapes at that time. There was no MP3 or flash disk or CDs. So matatus played mixtapes. The real name of mixtapes comes from those days. Yeah. So matatus played mixtapes and there were DJ mixes from clubs, and that's what we were listening to all the time. Then comes another elite group of guys who had access to people in Stevo and guys in South Africa and whatnot, who had access to getting original CDs.
Yes.
So there's this guy, I remember him, he was called Don. He's actually a DJ in the States right now. He's a very big DJ Top Don. He's a guy from my estate. So back then, he was one of the few guys who had music either on CD or on vinyl. So I remember one time I went to him and we had this nice chat, and he was a nice friend of mine, and he played me music off a CD. Yeah, it was a life-changing experience because I'd never had such clarity. I had never experienced anything like that in terms of audio sonic excellence. Yeah, So he played Jodeci Forever My Lady off a CD player. I mean, those days nobody had CD players. Like you could count the houses that had CD players. Yeah, you had to be the 1%. So as we didn't have one, so this guy had a CD player in his house, and we listened to Jodeci. Yeah, and there was just something about that thing. I remember that night I couldn't sleep. I was just thinking about this thing, and I'm wondering to myself, I listen to music in Kenya, I've listened to recordings and whatnot, but how come this one is just completely, totally something? It was like making a Marvel movie in Kenya right now. Yeah, that was what the experience felt like. Yeah, it was so foreign, it was so space age, it was so out of our time. Yeah, but that thing kept looming in my head, the wanting to know what goes into these American productions. Yeah, at this same time, KTN begins, and then there is this.
KTN begins.
Yes.
So we're talking like 92.
Yes, somewhere around there. And KTN has this really fancy young guy called Jimmy Gathu. And Jimmy Gathu is one of the only guys in this country at that time who has begun a culture of something that we had never known before in our lives, and this is not just music videos, but black R&B and hip-hop music videos on television.
Hey yo, hip-hop heads, welcome to paradise. The only place for the hip-hop top dogs.
Where my dogs at? Walk with me now. Wow, 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 yippee-yo, yippee-yay.
And cats. Where the party don't stop till we blow up the spot. Is you down to go pound for pound? We'll step up to the mix and you'll bounce on only on Drop 'em Mondays 6 p.m. on KTN.
Danger! Danger! Get on the floor!
Yeah, so we were glued. Yeah,
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
We were glued because this was an experience that we could not even understand. And I remember at this same time, I'm in my last years of high school.
Where were you in high school? Same school?
No, I was in St. Mary's Yala, which is somewhere next to Kisumu area. So at
So
this
you
same
left
time,
Nairobi and bounced to Kisumu for high school?
yes, that's
Hey,
what
boss.
I did my high school there.
Okay, we'll come back to Jimmy Gathu. Did that in any way affect your, I mean, you were in the St. Mary's that I know, which is over here.
Yeah,
That's like the Barbie of Barbie schools.
of course.
Then you left and went
Then I was thrown in the other direction, you see. So what it did, because we still wanted to kind of be in touch and know what's going on. So within the school, we formed little groups, special interest groups. So I found guys who also like rap and whatnot. So we'd hang out together, you know, we'd rap together and go over songs together and whatnot, yeah. And then at this time there was the culture of bullying. So one thing I learned that would help me not to get bullied was to rap for guys. I was in drama club, and drama had all the hip guys at that time, yeah. So the hip guys of the school are all in drama, and I realized those hip guys were the same people who were bullies. So I became friends with all the hip guys because they realized that this kid knows how to rap some of these songs. Yeah. So I kind of.
And this time, by the way, when you're saying your rap, it's not that you're writing your own raps.
No, it was cramming. It was cramming
you
songs.
You are Googling.
Yeah.
You are the Google.
It was cramming songs like Kinanoti by Nature and all that, and singing them back, Fresh Prince and what have you.
Okay, yeah. Informer.
Yes. So back then we'd listen to that, we'd cram it word for word, and be able to rap it back. Okay. Yeah. So that, basically high school, that was it. But you see, high school, there was always that 1 month there at home. So when we come back home, we catch up. Then you go back to school, there's like a hard life, not listening to music, whatnot. Though we had Walkmans that were illegal, we listened to music at night, sent watchmen to buy batteries. And that was it. I mean, we were determined to keep the culture alive, yeah? So that's pretty much the beginning of everything, yeah. But bear in mind that all this time, I still don't know that one day I'm going to become a producer. It's just something that is so much fun, you know.
Are you playing piano at this time? By this time, do you know how to play any musical instrument?
I could play enough to take a song from the beginning to the end. I never really got formal training in piano like grade 1 to 8, though I would have loved to. But what I did is I learned by ear. I learned from people who could play. Yeah, I learned from being in church and hanging around guys who already knew. But I never really got that formal training. So most of it was by ear. So I was still, every time I got a chance, I was still playing music at this time, yeah.
Okay.
But it was only piano at that time, and really there was no big plan by then. Everything was still at a very early stage.
Okay, so you meet this guy, or this guy enters the airwaves on a station called KTN.
Yes.
KTN, it used to have a 62.
Yes.
If I'm not wrong at that time.
Channel 62, yes, I remember.
And he's called Jimmy Gathu.
Yeah.
So what impact did Jimmy Gathu have on you?
Well, what Jimmy Gathu does for me at this time is he opens up something that to me was the coolest thing that I could imagine existed in this world, because rap videos and R&B videos by that time, they were just as glossy as they are today. Yeah, those fancy cars, those well-dressed guys, those guys in fancy haircuts. The music was well mixed. The artist looked neat. The image was great. You know, the direction of the music videos was good. I mean, those videos by that time, those guys were already on it. You know, they're not rehearsing. They already knew the culture and the art and the science of delivering a hot music video by the early 90s. Us were still on this other side, so we didn't know what was going on. But by that time, the industry in advanced countries had already reached the point that it's almost the same as it is now, yeah, in terms of videos and whatnot. So it was a spectacle, yeah, and it was a challenge, because I remember there was Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. These guys came with a culture that just swept Nairobi completely. You know, we were kids with our oversized jeans and our oversized checked shirts, standing at the corners thinking that we are what? Thinking that we're Americans, yeah? And that's what we wanted to be, because it was the coolest thing that anybody could be at that point in time, yeah? So we were hooked on this music. We listened to it night and day. It was like an estate thing at the same time. We were too young to go out or do anything, but we were in the estate, and this music
now
was
Langata Estate.
Yes, this music was like it was like a driving and a uniting thing for us at that time. It was a culture. Yeah, when you get into a matatu, you take a matatu, go to town, not even a light, and then just come back to Langata, just so that you can listen to music at a loud level that you can't listen to at home. Yeah, so all this, by this time, Jimmy Gathu comes, and then there's Rapem, there's Rastrat, there's Jamadelic, and there's another one, I think it was for Lingala African music and whatnot. Basically, Kaskas, yes. There's no YouTube, yeah. There is no way to store music anywhere in terms of videos, yeah. So this is the only place where this music is happening, yeah. So by this time, you had to run home by 6 o'clock, turn on the television, tune into KTN, and catch the jams, yeah, at this time. So basically, you'd watch a music video on Tuesday, and you have to wait up to the next week Tuesday to watch the same music video, because every day had a different genre. So that's where now we all began to get that exposure, and the idea that there's a thing called a record industry. There is people somewhere out there who look rich. We didn't know how rich they are, but they looked rich. I mean, they were driving Mercedes, they had Range Rovers, they looked young. They were like
nothing about
the crisscross were like 16 years old. They're holding money. They have gold chains, you know. So for us, it was fascinating. Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating to know that there's guys doing this, and there's actually a really, really cool industry somewhere in the world. And at that time, because the benchmark in Kenya there was a record industry in Kenya in the 60s, 70s, but it kind of disappeared. So by this time, all we could receive was music from America. We never looked back at our original roots of Benga and 70s Kiswahili music, but then it was almost drowned. So all that was happening on the airwaves was either Jamaican music or music from the States or music from
KBC going the other way with just local to the core. Those, the Sing and Shine, or was it what Sing and Shine or something?
Yes, those Sing and Shine, those Joy Bringers.
Joy Bringers, yes.
Yes. And Joy Bringers was the gospel show of that time. It was equivalent to Kubamba or something of that time, where artists came on air, played their instruments there live. You know, you'd set up like what happened in the 70s in US with Soul Train and Ed Sullivan Show and all that. So it was those days they'd come with their guitars and the drum set and everything, and they'd play music, Joy Bringers, and that was it.
But it didn't relate to your demographic. Or it didn't relate to you as an urban.
It totally didn't, because it was we honestly didn't want it. Yeah, we wanted what we thought was more hip than that. Yeah. And what was more hip than that was Jodeci and Fresh Prince and that kind of sound, yeah? Even though we had no idea how it works or how to achieve it.
Okay, so now, what happens now once you finish? What's the next transition to this? Or are you listening to any local Kenyan music? In fact, at this time, you're not? We
honestly are not, because we're teenagers. And we want to be hip.
Yes.
Yeah. We want to be the coolest guy, and listening to local music at that time was not the coolest thing to do.
Yeah.
You see, there was that. It was like a competition. Who has the latest music? You know. So at this time, also another thing that happens that is life changing is I become more active in church, and this time it's not my dad's church. I moved to a church called NPC Valley Road. Yeah. And once I joined NPC Valley Road, I find that there's Kumbeka Youth Church. You don't have to go to the main one throughout. Yeah. There's another one, it was called Fortress. Yeah. There's like a youth church over there. And then for the first time, guess what I realized? There's a bunch of young, hip, saved Christian kids that I never knew existed in Nairobi.